Hey, English 75B, just here to give you a little bit of an overview of what's happening week 7. What you will notice is if you're looking at our overview for this week, we're going to talk a little bit about World War One and some of the social, cultural, and historical changes that take place in that period. We've got some work to do on Robert Frost's poetry. That's coming up towards the tail end of this week. There's also going to be a peer review that you do. Wednesday here is your this Wednesday here is your reading schedule. Notice it's a lot of kind of contextual information here. Now, we're a little bit light on all of that because I know that you've got a rough draft coming up, and I've talked with some of you about it already. I'm going to be available for lots of different times this week. Hopefully, you do have my updated advice hours, and you can find them on the homepage. If you can't make those times, let me know. We'll find a way to work it in. So, yes, we'll be reading a little bit about this period. Then you're going to be reading about World War One and its aftermath, and you've got no discussion, like I said, and you've got a handful of poems from Robert Frost. Sunday, you will submit that rough draft, and I'll be back in just one second. All right, now moving very quickly back to the module. Bip, all the way in week 1. I don't know why it took us all the way back there. Go ahead and collapse these guys. Now, here you'll also notice that I've given a short video lecture on triac paragraph structure and how that can work to help you incorporate those quotations from your one work or two works of literature in your analysis essay. If you've got any questions on that, please feel free to let me know. I continue it in the second video, and I also talk about how to avoid dropped quotations so that you can very seamlessly and smoothly slide in that really cool quotation that you have. I also have an example essay that a former student of mine wrote for, I believe it was for 75A, because it was for Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But anyway, it's a nice, good, strong model of what a literary analysis essay should look like. I've also got peer review instructions popping up right there. We don't have to worry about that till a little bit later this week. If you'll notice that the rough draft submission is going to be due. I didn't give a due date on it. I think I put Sunday. I know it said Saturday in one place, but if you look here, once again, it says Sunday. You're going to have your reading to do on Saturday. Slide it somewhere in there. So I'll make sure that I make that clear, and I will go ahead and do that. I'm also going to make that come out a little bit differently too. So that's pretty much our schedule for the week. If you've got any questions on that, of course, please let me know. From there, I'll go ahead and jump right into our background information about American literature during this period in 1914 and 1945. So we're talking about from the beginning of World War I all the way through the end of World War II. And I know it's strange, but those anthologies that we have are pretty much divided by wars. And it's a strange way to do it, but in some ways these wars signal great shifts in American culture, technology, and organization, and social mores, and they really do transform American society in lots of different ways, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. So, if you're looking at these two wars as historical markers, some really important stuff happens in the middle there. You've got the 19th Amendment, the Constitution. Women are given the right to vote. We just had the centenary of that just last year. Pretty impressive stuff. The Immigration Act of 1924, which curtailed immigration. This was a very xenophobic time in certain ways. You also have the Great Migration from 1910 to 1930. Great Migration was once again large uh, parts of the African American population in the South moving northward to urban cities in order to find better economic opportunities and also to escape some of the very deeply ingrained racism that was still present in those older communities. So the migrations going up to places like Baltimore, Maryland, Boston, New York, Chicago. You also have the first Red Scare, in 1919 and 1920. That's the Communist Revolution that topples the, uh, the Tsar in Russia. And okay, I'm back. And this really does bring up a lot of anxiety about the political nature of communism, especially in the United States. And a lot of that still continues in a way, but in a very different form in our contemporary era. Then we have the stock market crash in 1929. So we have economic upheaval as well. And notice this happens after a huge economic boom where everybody's having a very good time. Not everybody, but it's a time of expanded wealth and personal freedom. You may have heard this point in history being called the Roaring Twenties, and it was a period of liberation and social innovation for people across the social spectrum, women, minorities. Very artistically creative period, but when the stock market crashes, it really does contract a lot of this social innovation and progress that was moving American culture forward. And of course, the Great Depression occurs for about the decade after that, which really uh, wrecks the American economy and throws American culture and society into a tailspin for roughly a decade. 1 out of every 4 people who is searching for work is out of work, and that is a conservative estimate. A couple photos to help bring the history alive for you. Here are some of the suffragists who were rallying and picketing in order to help get greater political awareness and momentum for women having the right to vote. And we've got 2 very famous suffragists here, Audrey Osborne and Mrs. James Stephens. And it's hard for us to sometimes realize just what a big difference this means. Women having the right to vote on their own does begin to change the political landscape. World War I, we cannot, underestimate the social impact that it had on American culture and American literature. We're not reading too much from World War I. Something's got to give. I can't fit everything in there. But it was an extremely gruesome war where, once again, military leaders didn't really know how to effectively employ the technology that had changed since the last great conflict. And so these poor people were just mowed down and spent their lives, short and brutal as they may be, jockeying for 1 or 2 miles of mud on the plains of France. If you've ever seen the movie 1917, you get to see a little bit of a glimpse of that, and it's quite good. A terribly gruesome conflict. And of course, with the Second World War, we see another very powerful drain on the American workforce, which propels a lot of women to go into manufacturing, and other war-related jobs in order to help the war effort. And again, after this happening after the right to vote in 1920, it begins to change the American notion of where women belong in American society. And it's not like it keeps going forward, forward, forward. It's more like a needle that goes back and then forward, but it still is kind of leaning more towards that progressive and egalitarian end the farther we go in history. Once women get a sense of the freedom and economic security they can have by having their own jobs and working for themselves, a lot of them decide that's what they want to do, and that not necessarily that they must be married or stay at home. Now, let's talk about the social context. The rise of psychoanalysis is really important in this period because people start to think about those unconscious or barely hidden irrational fears, antisocial emotions, inappropriate desires. You also have the rise of the new woman, which once again is related to the 1920s and a greater sense of social experimentation during that economic boom. That too makes people think about gender roles very, very differently. There was that contraction, of course, with some of that experimentation and progress when the Great Depression happens, but that's kind of a historical, I don't want to call it a truth, but at least a precept. When economies are working well, people tend to not contract and fall back on structures that are very traditional. They tend to try to forge new ground socially. And there is a greater sense of sexual freedom during that age. We're getting near to the point at which the birth control pill will be invented. Sexuality in terms of a woman's desire as opposed to just being an ancillary or a prop for a male's desire really does change the dynamic in lots of people. And of course, there is that greater economic freedom, especially in cities where people can work. And we saw some of that economic freedom when we read Sister Carrie, right? And we talked about suffrage already. I showed you pictures of all that. And I talked about the Great Migration a little bit already. And wow, this is repetitive. But with that Great Migration, we also get the rise of jazz, one of the truly innovative and unique American art forms. A blend of African spirituals and other indigenous musical forms taken not only from the fields and from the plantations, but also from across the sea. With the rise of jazz, we also see another very important result of the Great Migration, and that is the rise of Black Harlem. And with Black Harlem comes the Harlem Renaissance. Now, Black Harlem is a really amazing place because it's a point at which African Americans pretty much have jurisdiction over that particular part of the borough in New York. In other words, they're in all levels of government. They're policemen, they're teachers, they're city administrators, they're artists. They are not in a subservient or submissive role like they are in so many other parts of the country. So it becomes this really important, explosively creative time. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. It'll be really great. And from Black Harlem, of course, comes the Harlem Renaissance. A lot of you already know some of those names. Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, and others. We're coming up just to about time there. That'll be a good time for us to stop right here.